Up to 1906, the meatpacking industries were extremely unsanitary, which posed as a potential danger to consumers and workers. In 1904, the Meatpackers' Union in Chicago went on strike. They wanted better wages and working conditions. A young man named Upton Sinclair was hired by Fred Warren, the editor of the socialist journal, Appeal to Reason. Sinclair was sent to a meatpacking house in Chicago. He was assigned to write a novel about immigrant workers and the harsh and unfair treatment they endured. For the first 2 months, Sinclair scouted out the Chicago stockyards. He referred to it as Packingtown. He listened to the stories of the foreign workers and was intrigued by what they had to say. Their stories had to do with the mistreatment, low wages, and mind-numbing shifts. After hearing their stories, Sinclair began to write his novel, The Jungle. For 3 months I worked incessantly. I wrote with tears and anguish, pouring into the pages all the pain the life had meant to me. The title The Jungle reflects what Sinclair witnessed while scouting out the meatpacking houses. The working conditions and environment the workers were in were horrid. It was dangerous and unsanitary. Immigrant men often had the most dangerous and backbreaking work. They worked in unventilated rooms in the hot summer and unheated rooms in the winter. They stood on floors covered with blood and meat scraps. Piled up meat on the floor would be carried off in carts full of sawdust, human spit, human waste, dead rats, rat dung, and rat poison. Nothing was left out. Every part to every animal was used. They often dyed the waste end of smoked beef with chemicals so it wouldn't show white. They then would ground up all the waste meat and flavor it with spices to make it taste like something. Pork fat and beef scraps were canned and labeled as potted chicken. After regular hours, when no meat inspectors were around, the workers processed injured and diseased animals. Some inspectors took bribes and looked the other way when diseased animals were slaughtered and guts were swept off the floor and packaged as potted ham. Dead rats and rotting meat weren't the only things ground up into the products people were unknowingly buying. Men who worked in the tank rooms often fell into the steaming vats. No one ever bothered to get them out, and they were often overlooked for days. Just like the rats, their bones were ground up and sent out to the world as Durham's pure leaf lard. There were many other work hazards in this industry. Men who used knives while working the assembly line frequently lost fingers, and those who worked near the machinery lost limbs after being caught and snagged. Many of the men didn't have fingernails because they were worn off after pulling many hides. Their knuckles and fingers were swollen. Men who worked in the chilling rooms later suffered from a disease called rheumatism. Wool pluckers had to paint wool barehanded with acid, causing their fingers to be burnt away. Those who made tins for canned meat got many cuts, which caused many cases of blood poisoning. Some workers lost their eyes after getting hit by hanging hooks, and some were burned by tanks filled with hot solution. Men who hauled around 100 pounds of meat crippled their backs. Tuberculosis was a common illness at this time, meaning many workers had it. They constantly coughed up blood and spit on the floor. There were no bathrooms but a few toilets next to the work area. In some areas there were no toilets at all and workers had to go in corners. There was no soap or water for them to clean their hands. They usually just rinsed their hands off in the water later used in sausage. The workers had to eat where they worked because there were no lunchrooms. In addition to the physical pain, the workers had to worry about financial uncertainty and the stress of finding enough money just to pay rent each month. From the use of diseased cattle as sausage meat to the processing of people, rats, and filth, it's fair to say that the nation had the right to know exactly what they were buying and consuming. When Sinclair finished The Jungle, he went to 6 different publishers, and each one rejected him. They thought it was too gruesome and too much for the public to handle. Sinclair persisted and Doubleday published the novel in February 1906. It was an immediate success and sold over 250,000 copies. One of those copies wound up in the hands of President Roosevelt. Although it was very successful, Sinclair failed to get his point across. I aimed at the public's heart and by accident I hit in the stomach. Sinclair intended on showing the mistreatment of immigrant workers, but ended up showing the nation with a gruesome description of what went on in the meatpacking factories. Just like everyone else who had read the book, the president was sickened and sent a few of his own agents to Chicago to investigate. He wanted to find out if the meatpacking was as bad as Sinclair had described. When the agents came back, they reported it to be 100 times worse. While investigating, a slaughtered hog fell part way into a worker's toilet. It was taken out and put back on the hook without being cleaned. After getting a report back from the agents, Roosevelt wrote a letter to Congress declaring a law be passed to enable inspectors to supervise from the beginning of slaughtering to the end of canning and packaging. Roosevelt invited Sinclair to the White House to give advice on how to make inspections safer. By June 30th, 1906, the Pure Food and Drugs Act, which regulated food additives and prohibited misleading food and drug labels, The Meat Inspection Act was another law passed and has authorized inspectors to stop any bad or mislabeled meats from entering interstate and foreign commerce. Commissioners recommended that inspections take place at every stage of the processing of meat. They also called for the Secretary of Agriculture to make rules requiring the cleanliness and wholesomeness of animal products. The Employees' Liability Act was passed in 1906 to better their working conditions. The government took on the responsibility of getting laws passed to better the nation. Consumers now know what they are buying and eating. The working environment has become much safer and sanitary. Workers are no longer losing limbs and dying on the job, and consumers are no longer eating dead, poisoned, and rotting animals. Workers get more benefits and better treatment.